As the battle against ISIS seems to be entering its final stages, I feel like it's time that we have a look back at where the hell these guys came from and a reflection on their history. It seems like it was only 3 years ago today that ISIS was just the name of the spy agency Archer worked for. And then, like a bat out of hell or a jihadi out of Syria, ISIS became America's #1 threat. In today's book, Black Flags: The Rise of ISIS by Warrick, we'll be talking about the history of ISIS as well as how it will affect future Middle Eastern policy for the US. But before we can get into ISIS, we have to go all the way back to the 80s, when Reagan was our president, men with long hair and makeup didn't make them a transvestite, and our #1 threat wasn't Islamic terrorism, but communism and Russia. Oh, how the times have changed. It was during this period of time that Russia invaded Afghanistan, and the US responded with Operation Cyclone, where they recruited Islamic extremists throughout the Middle East to come to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. Bringing a bunch of bad guys together in order to defeat a big bad guy. Where have I heard this before?
It's taking some work, but I finally have them.
The worst of the worst.
Where?
Let's just say I put him in a hole, threw away the hole. I want to assemble a task force of the most dangerous people on the planet who I think can do some good.
Anyways, the problem with the Jihadi Suicide Squad, other than the fact that you couldn't see the Islamic Margot Robbie's face, which was the only reason you would watch the original, was that it brought relatively disconnected Islamic extremists together, creating a larger network for themselves when they went back home. One of those men who returned home was a man named Ahmed Fadil... his name is Zarqawi. It's Zarqawi. He was born in a poor town in Jordan, and he was generally just a petty criminal and a thug for most of his life, until he found religion. However, like most assholes who find religion, they're generally still assholes afterwards. They just use God to justify it now. After returning home for a period of time, Zarqawi decided to take up the cause of jihad again and returned to Afghanistan in 2000. He went to see the leader of Al-Qaeda and a fellow Afghan war veteran, Osama bin Laden. However, Osama thought Zarqawi was just an uneducated thug from Jordan and actually refused to meet him. Instead, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda sent Zarqawi 400 miles away to a desolate part of Afghanistan to start his own training camp. But Zarqawi was never a part of the inner circles of Al-Qaeda. Basically, Zarqawi was like the Jen of Al-Qaeda. No one really liked him. And then 9/11 happened, and Al-Qaeda became America's #1 enemy. And although Zarqawi was a part of Al-Qaeda, he was so far out of the inner circle that he didn't even know about 9/11 until it actually happened. Basically, he wasn't even a part of the Al-Qaeda group chat. When America invaded Afghanistan, Zarqawi fled across the Iranian border and made it to northern Iraq, where he used his contacts from the Afghan war to be a part of the Ansar al-Islam movement. However, Zarqawi couldn't really do too much damage because the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, wasn't really too keen on Islamists and used to regularly jail and torture them. But luckily for Zarqawi, it turned out Saddam had even bigger enemies. Zarqawi took advantage of the instability caused by the United States by attacking Shia religious holy sites with terrorist attacks. He did this because he knew that Shia militias would retaliate against Sunni populations and causing a civil war and a real cluster for the United States. Zarqawi's terrorist attacks were like the real-life personification of posting a shitpost meme in an internet thread in order to cause a flame war. The Donald would be proud. As chaos broke out across Iraq, Zarqawi was able to use the backlash from Shia militias in order to gain safe havens to Sunni regions of Iraq. He started posting videos of himself in action, including videos of him beheading innocent civilians, and started rising to prominence amongst Islamic circles, and was soon becoming the new face of Islamic terrorism. With the blessing of Al-Qaeda's second-in-command Zarqawi, Zarqawi was able to consolidate his group into a new terrorist organization of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. Eventually, Zarqawi was killed and the surrogates of his organizations remained dormant. Iraq became more stabilized and the US eventually pulled out. The remnants of Zarqawi's organization still remained in some small western villages of Iraq, and it renamed itself the Islamic State and had a new leader named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Then the Arab Spring broke out in 2011, where people across the Middle East started demanding more freedoms for themselves from their tyrant leaders. In Syria, protests broke out against their leader, Bashar al-Assad. Initially, the protests were fairly peaceful, and instead of complying with some of the protesters' demands, Assad thought it would be better just to shoot and arrest all the protesters. Naturally, this caused a lot of animosity from the US and other Western governments, basically telling Assad, yeah, you can't do that. But Assad had one trick up his sleeve. He claimed after rebellion broke out that the rebels were actually Islamic terrorists. By doing so, he put pressure on Western governments not to support the rebels. He then decided to release the political prisoners he was holding from the protests that broke out. But he also decided to release a bunch of Islamic extremists, thus basically poison pilling the entire rebel group with Islamic extremists that he himself released from Syrian prisons. Seeing the growing instability in Syria, the Islamic State in Iraq decided to take advantage of it and grow their operations there. They launched the al-Nusra Front, which was guised as a rebel group, but was really just a new recruiting tool for young Islamic extremists to come and join their movement. They took advantage of the relatively open border between Turkey and Syria and actively recruited Islamic extremists to cross over said border to come and join them. They also used video propaganda like their original leader Zarqawi did in Iraq to recruit both money and people. They then conquered the city of Raqqa in Syria, where they could impose heavy fines on the civilians there in order to acquire more money and resources so they could launch their campaign. Then, like a bat out of hell, they crossed over into western Iraq, where they shocked the world and conquered Iraq's second largest city of Mosul. However, eventually they met stiff resistance from less friendly Kurds and Shia militias and were eventually stopped. As we're seeing the decline and death of ISIS, I think it's important to understand that Islamic extremism thrives where there is instability. And the United States should consider that moving forward with any foreign policy in the Middle East. Because wherever you topple a dictator or overthrow a government, what comes out at the other end might not be so great. Overall, I gave this book 4.5 stars out of 5 and highly recommend it for those who want to learn more about the history of ISIS. Well, that's my review, guys. Thanks for watching and stay tuned next time for more BPB.